Hello there, people of the internet. Today is going to be kind of a history lesson. I've been asked a couple of times as to why rimmed cartridges were a thing. I know I've covered it a couple of times on this channel, but I've never taken the time to make like a dedicated video to it. So what are the benefits for having a rimmed cartridge? Like, this is 7.62 by 54 rimmed, and there's this big rim on the back, and it stops your cartridge. And anyone who's ever dealt with a rim knows that rim lock is a thing. And people who aren't even gun people can see how a rim on a cartridge would cause all sorts of issues with a firearm. If you have rim lock, or if you're trying to feed from a belt and you gotta pull the round out of the belt and then move it somewhere else and then move it, forward into a chamber and then lock the bolt behind that. There's just definitely more complex systems that come with having a rimmed cartridge than a rimless cartridge. So why were these rims a thing? Well, let's go ahead and start talking with a little bit of history. These rimmed cartridges showed up right whenever smokeless powder became a thing. Back in the late 1800s, around 1886, whenever the French had invented smokeless powder, all of the other major countries tried adopting rifles in smokeless powder as well, replacing their old school black powder rifle firearms. And as a result of adopting these new rifles with these new powders, they adopted new cartridges as well. Now, this was the late 1800s whenever this was happening, so technology was not all that advanced. It was definitely pretty damn good compared to how it was 100 years before, but still not all that advanced. As a result, when these countries were mass producing these rifles to be able to, give to their soldiers on a tremendously large scale, meaning they were going to make hundreds of thousands, if not millions of these rifles, it was simply easier to headspace a rifle on the rim of a cartridge as opposed to on the neck of a cartridge like rimless cartridges are headspaced on. Now, what headspace is that is the location of the chamber and the barrel in accordance to the location of the bolt. So whenever the bolt is closed and locked into battery, the round is sitting very firmly, very snugly with the right amount of tolerances inside of the chamber. Whereas if the headspace was off and there was, say, like a little bit, this is going to be a dramatic over-representation, but if there was an air gap in between the bolt being locked and the chamber to where the round could, move around and deform and whatnot, that right there would be a headspace issue, and that could cause some significant problems. Avoiding that was dramatically easier with the time period's technology if you just headspace on the rim of the cartridge as opposed to headspacing on the neck of the cartridge. And there were a lot of countries out there that were using rimmed cartridges at the end of the 1800s. I know the Japanese were using a semi-rimmed cartridge. You had the British with the 303 cartridge. You had the Russians with the 7.62 by 54 rimmed. The United States had their 3040 Krag, which was also a rimmed cartridge, and before that they had the 4570, also a rimmed cartridge. There's just a bunch of reasons why these cartridges had rims. Now, if you were building a cartridge based around a certain design, like if you had, a cartridge designed for lever actions, then having a rim on it would be ideal just because of how the lever action system works. But for the most part, we're talking about military surplus rifles and why a lot of these had these rimmed cartridges. Now, not all of them during this time period had rimmed cartridges. Let me see if I can find what I'm looking for here. For example, 7mm and 8mm Mauser were a rimless cartridge, and this right here was more difficult to produce at the time in terms of the rifles and the head spacing and whatnot, but they managed to figure it out. It was more difficult, but they still managed to be able to do that and still produce a significant amount of rifles. As a matter of fact, Mauser rifles are by far one of the more predominant styles of rifle that you're going to see in the world, around the entirety of the world. Let me go ahead and throw myself on some earmuffs right here. Now, there are a lot of benefits to having a rimless cartridge. Mainly, you don't have to worry about the rim catching on stuff as cartridges move back and forth or go through belts or whatever it is the system is trying to be able to do here. You don't have to worry about a lot of those things. Like, for example, if I grab my Mauser here, this is a Yugo 2447 in 8mm Mauser, and I load one round into the magazine, but I load a second round purposefully behind the rim of that first round I doubt you guys will be able to see it, but I'll show it to you guys. That top round, the rim is purposefully behind the round on the bottom. If this was a rimmed cartridge, this right here would cause rim lock, and as a result, I would not be able to push the bolt forward. However, this right here is not a rimmed cartridge, so it doesn't matter the orientation of those cartridges. I can just, you know, push the round right over top of that one and send some lead downrange. Ow. This Turkish stuff definitely hits hard, that's for sure. Ow. That one hurt. This Turkish stuff is a 155 grain projectile traveling at about 3,000 feet per second. And that is a spicy round. So, there are ways to get around rimmed cartridges. For example, the 7.62x54 rimmed out of this Mosin here, just because the Russians were dealing with the 7.62x54 rimmed, they knew rims were going to cause an issue. The Mosin actually has a system in it that separates the cartridges because they're rimmed cartridges, and I will show you guys exactly that. Right now, sitting on top of the magazine right here, the cartridge is, you know, in line with the bolt to be pushed into the chamber, but the rim of that cartridge is separated from the rims underneath. That's why with the Mosin, if you push the round down even further into the actual magazine itself, you can see how the round is held down. That right there is a system that holds the rounds inside of the magazine down further beyond the round that is about to be loaded inside of the chamber, and that helps prevent rim lock. So now whenever I close the rifle, that round will not be chambered because it's not in line, but whenever I lock the bolt, that system disengages and the next round will pop up, so I can go ahead and load that into the chamber and send that round downrange. And that is a brilliant system to be able to get past rim lock. Oh boy, this is a 174 grain projectiles, and they actually kick harder than that 155 grain Turkish stuff. Ow. That's just some cheap steel case stuff though. So I imagine the velocities are not going to be as good as what you would expect from some better quality ammunition, but there are ways to get around rims. However, as technology progressed and countries began to get beyond the cartridges that they were using individually, soon NATO became a thing. Did I say NATO? Soon NATO became a thing, and 7.62 NATO was just kind of standardized among all of the rifles and all the platforms, and 7.62 NATO is actually a rimless cartridge, just like the 8mm Mauser, to where these guys won't catch on one another, so you don't have to worry about the issues with the rims. By the time this right here was adopted, it was late 1950s, early 1960s, depending on the country and the area and the adoption that we're talking about here. Technology had gotten good enough to where firearms could very comfortably and readily be made that headspace on the neck, as opposed to headspacing on the rim of the cartridge. So countries that were still using these old school designs that had come out, back in the late 1800s, that had these rimmed cartridges, I mean, they were still using it because they had the firearms that were still chambered in that, and just because of logistics sake, replacing absolutely everything with a new cartridge is not the best solution. There were some countries out there that did it. I know the Japanese went from 6.5 Jap to 7.7 Jap, and the Italians tried swapping over to 7.35 Carcano, and just with everything that was going on in the world, they were not really able to pull that off. The Japanese definitely did it better than the Italians did, but even so, not all that great. After World War II, whenever NATO became a thing and all of the nations began to unify and adopt one standard cartridge to go through everybody, they ended up going with a rimless cartridge. And some of these old milsurps are actually rechambered or made from scratch in this new rimless cartridge. So this right here is a #1 Ishapur. And this right here is a rifle, well, this general design of rifle was originally chambered in a rimmed cartridge, the 303 British. This right here was never in 303 British. It's not a conversion. It came out in 7.62 NATO, but this design of rifle was originally in 303 British. And this one right here has been rechambered, well, not rechambered, this one right here has been recreated to be able to run this 7.62 NATO ammo. However, that being said, this magazine's a little on the wonky side, so there might be some malfunctions with this firearm. If that is the case, that is not a fault of the firearm itself. or the ammunition, this magazine has just seen better days. So this is a example of a firearm that was originally the old school rimmed ammo design that was redesigned to be able to take a more modern rimless cartridge. Personally, if I'm dealing with an infield, I would want the original 303 infield, just that original style, that original, what's the word I'm looking for? The original mechanics in 303 were so much smoother. I've ran several Ishapore rifles. I mean, they work, they're fast, they're definitely infields. But, man, they don't have the exact precision machine work that went into some of those old school 303 rifles. So let's go ahead, send a couple of rounds here downrange, because why the hell not? Ah, that doesn't kick nearly as bad as some of those old Milsurp rifles. This is a 150 grain projectile. And these ones right here, with this being M80 ball, these 150 grain projectiles are probably going to be traveling around 27 to 2,800 feet per second. So they are a lightweight projectile traveling slower than some of those other military surplus rifles that I was just using, which certainly explains why the recoil was not nearly as harsh. Where did that brass go? This M80 ball stuff is reloadable, so I go ahead and I save it. Anyway, there's a good explanation as to why rimmed cartridges are a thing. Hopefully you guys learned something with this. And hopefully, well, if I am asked in the future to go ahead and explain why rimmed cartridges are in fact a thing, I will just go ahead and reference people to this video. So, appreciate your time, guys. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go and go check that out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. I'll see you all in the next episode. I'm gonna go hydrate. It's hot out here. Since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. The poor man's Garen. Shame that bolt action shotguns aren't more mainstream.